don't know about you, but I had a spring in my step today. It felt a bit lighter, and I felt a bit lighter. And as we enjoy these longer evenings and the signs of spring coming, one of the most widely celebrated moments in the global calendar is also approaching, isn't it? That of Easter. Easter is woven into our cultural heritage through art, through music, through holidays, through traditions. But beneath those familiar customs lies a radical claim that Jesus of Nazareth rose from the dead. Now, if that's true, it transforms our perspective not just on life after death, but life before death as well. Now, to discuss that claim, I'm really thrilled that we're going to have with us tonight Mike Hood, a friend of mine and a friend of the Round Church. Normally he's behind these events, he co-chairs the Life in the Round committee, but today he's up front. As Tim said, he's one of the local pastors at Eden Baptist Church. I think he arrived in Cambridge in 2013 to study English literature at Selwyn College, Cambridge, and since then he's completed a master's in theology and Christian ministry as well. He's worked for several years for UCCF, supporting the university Christian unions, and the book is really the fruit of some of those deep dives into what people are thinking about and how you present the Christian faith. Mike has spoken all over the country, and as well as speaking, he's also a spoken word poet. He has performed or competed at the Royal Albert Hall and also at the Big Church Festival, along with his wife. So we're really thrilled to have Mike with us this evening. He'll be drawing on his book to help us explore how the resurrection of Jesus unlocks the mysteries of meaning, death, and of God. Mike will come up in a second, and after he's spoken to us for just about under an hour, there'll be time for an audience Q&A, so I'll pop up again then. Do be thinking about any questions that you'd like to ask Mike during the talk. After the end of our formal time together, we'll have an opportunity to continue the conversation over cheese and wine and some soft drinks, and there'll also be a chance to get your hands on a copy of Mike's book. So without any further ado, I'll invite Mike up to lead us through this evening. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Anna. As Susanna was saying, why are we here? We are not here in order to sell you my book. Let's be totally clear about that. I would really hate anyone to feel under any obligation at all to buy the book. That's not the point of this evening. I only want you to buy it if you actually end up wanting to read it. We're here because when I was a skeptical teenager trying to work out what I made of God and faith and the meaning of life, somebody talked to me about Jesus coming back from the dead and the reasons that they were convinced historically that it was the only explanation for the evidence. And it was a huge part for me of coming to the realization that if Jesus was alive, if he'd risen from the dead, I should follow him and I could trust him. And that decision was the biggest decision I've ever made and the best decision I've ever made. And since then, I've dug deeper and deeper into those things, and I've seen time after time, friend after friend, from all kinds of different backgrounds and experiences, where for them as well, this question has been the question. This has been the thing that's changed everything. It has been digging into whether or not Jesus really rose from the dead. And so the book is about two things. The book is about, firstly, why it matters so much and why it's so incredibly good news if this is true. And then secondly, it's about what reason we have to believe that this actually is true. And tonight we're just going to do the first half of that. We're just going to think about why this matters so much and what it means if it's true, why it's the best news in the universe. And my hope, my aim for this evening is that you might get to the end of it feeling a little bit as deeply as I do that this is the most important question that anyone could ever wrestle with. It's the most important question for all of us to grapple with, is whether or not Jesus really rose from the dead. So just so you know where we're going, we're going to start by thinking about life beyond death and thinking about some of the questions that life throws at us that we can't begin to answer unless we know what happens beyond death. Then we'll have a bit of a chance to discuss that with the people around us, and then we'll kind of step closer to our experience right now and think about life before death, and think about a couple of the biggest questions that any of us wrestle with, and how the resurrection of Jesus speaks to those things too. So, we'll start with this question. Is love stronger than death? Because I think there are many big questions that we maybe go through lots of our lives not thinking about, but occasionally something will come up, something will happen, and we will realize that we desperately need an answer. And a lot of those questions, we can't get an answer unless we know what's on the other side of death. My granddad was the first person that I'd ever sat with on their deathbed. And as my brother and I held his hands, I felt like I didn't want to let him go. But I also was asking myself, let him go where? And I think most of us who've lost someone we love will have had moments where we find ourselves asking those kinds of questions. Have they really gone? Where are they now? Are they anywhere at all, or is there no them left? And we might talk about people watching over us or people being in a better place, but often we don't really know if we mean it, and so we're scared to ask too many questions, to think about it too hard. Some people teach us to be stoical about death. I never know if the right word is stoical or stoic, but they teach us to be like the Stoics about death, and not to get too attached to anything or anyone. They say, look, we live in a vast, impersonal machine of a universe, and love is a really weird glitch in that machine. And that glitch will vanish in the end, and we should not try to fight that or to hope for something more. The only way to find peace is to surrender to the inevitable. But I don't know if you've had one of these moments, but as I held my granddad's hand, love did not feel like a glitch, and I didn't want to surrender. I remember several years ago going to the saddest funeral that I've ever been to. It was one of my wife Rachel's friends, Marcel, and they'd been in a Christian theatre company, and Marcel was just wonderful. He was a walking, talking explosion of joy. He'd become a Christian when he was 18, and it had totally changed his life, and he was completely transparent with everyone he met, and he had this booming laugh that could like shake you from the toes upwards. And he was an actor, and in the funeral they showed videos of him doing stuff. There was a video of him dancing dressed as a caterpillar for reasons that I still don't understand. He'd been in a show at the National Theatre, and people told stories about him gathering, ending up kind of assembling a massive debate about God in the sort of dressing room just before the start of a show or whatever. He was this brilliant, joyful guy, and he had died quite suddenly in his 30s, leaving behind a wife and 2 young kids, and they were just totally lost without him, and it was unbearably sad. And nobody was trying to say any of the sort of trite things that we sometimes say. And nobody was trying to make sense of what had happened. But there was a moment in the funeral where they played a video that he had recorded when he was working for this Christian theatre company, where he was playing the part of John, one of Jesus' friends and disciples, narrating the experience of meeting Jesus when he'd come back from the dead. And as he kind of spoke into the camera, describing what it was like to see Jesus radiant and real and right there with him in the room, the tears of joy welling up in the corners of his eyes, you could see that they were not acting. They weren't just a performance. They were real. And then it got to this bit where he spoke the words of Jesus, where Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will live even though they die." And you could hear in his voice that he meant it. And it was like he was preaching at his own funeral. And in that moment, it hit me in a way that it never had before. That if Jesus was alive, then Marcel was alive too. That he still existed, that he still loved his wife and his kids, that he still loved Jesus, and he was alive with him, enjoying being with him at that very moment. That if death had not defeated Jesus, then it had not defeated Marcel either. That it wasn't a day for us to kind of grieve the fact that death had defeated all of the love that had filled Marcel's life, but actually that Jesus' love was stronger than death. Because if Jesus died out of love for us and then he rose to unstoppable life, it means that love is stronger than death, not weaker. It's strong enough that if we believe in Jesus, he will take hold of us and he will never let go. And we will enjoy life with him forever. It's not that one day love will have been wiped out of the cosmic machine and death will be all that's left. It's that one day death will have been destroyed and love will be what's left. The second question that I think life throws at us that we need an answer to is, will justice ever come? A friend of mine told me once about a charity that he was involved with working in Uganda, and they were supporting the education of a 10-year-old girl there. And there was a local businessman who wanted to buy her family's house, and her mother wouldn't sell. And so this businessman abused the girl. And he bribed the police, the local police, so that when her older brother went to the police station to report the crime, they arrested her brother instead, for no reason. And my friend's charity had worked hard to gather as much evidence as they could against this man and to kind of make the case to the police. And nothing came of it. He was never even charged with an offense. And as far as I know, he is still running a successful business to this day. And when my friend told me that story, I felt that sense rising in me that justice is so important and it's so elusive. Because there's nothing unusual about that story. It's not a sort of, oh, thank goodness we live in the UK and not in Uganda type thing. You know, I could tell you stories worse than that from leafy suburbs everywhere in the world, all the way down through history, countless times, countless people through, whether it's corruption or intimidation or sheer force, have been able to get away with terrible evils. And the problem is that if death is the end, then that's it. If death is the ultimate full stop, then that man's wealth will shield him forever, and that girl will never get to see that what he did to her matters. If this world of politics and power is all there is, then as long as someone has enough power, there is no hope for justice at all. But if Jesus rose from the dead, that is not true. Paul was one of the witnesses of Jesus' resurrection. A few years after he was in Athens, he gave a speech about Jesus, and the conclusion of that speech is this: now God commands all people everywhere to repent, for he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. So Jesus himself in his life, he said that he would be the just judge of everyone who's ever lived. And what Paul is saying here is, if Jesus rose from the dead, then God has vindicated that claim. God has proved that he was telling the truth. He really will be the judge of everyone. Imagine the difference that that makes to that Ugandan family. To know that death is not the end. That the justice that we get or don't get here is not the end of the story. That proper, real, true justice will one day be done. And not only that, but that the judge is Jesus. It's not some distant, cold, uncaring deity. It's Jesus who had such compassion on us and on the victims of injustice that he chose to become a victim of injustice, that he chose to subject himself to humiliation and abuse and even death that he did not deserve. So we know that when he judges, he will do it with deep compassion. Nobody will be forgotten. Nobody will be ignored. No tear that we have shed will be thrown away. He will judge in a way that shows exactly the right kind of compassion to that little girl, exactly the right kind of anger towards that businessman. And his justice will show them both exactly how much she is worth. However many lies this unjust world might have told her in the meantime, on that day she will know that she matters. Martin Luther King once said, "Evil may so shape events that Caesar will occupy a palace and Christ a cross, but one day that same Christ will rise up and split history into AD and BC, so that even the life of Caesar must be dated by his name." And the point is that it may seem as if political power and brute force rule the world, but ultimately, if Jesus rose from the dead, then he will have the final word. If he is in charge of the eternal future, no one will be forgotten and no injustice will be swept under the carpet. Every wrong will be put right. If Jesus rose from the dead, justice will come. So, two questions that life throws at us that we can't answer unless somebody shows us what lies beyond death. Is love stronger than death, and will justice ever come? This is our first chance for you to discuss with someone around you in twos or threes or fours if you want. Turn to the people around you and just chat about those questions. What do you think about life after death? And have you always thought what you do now? What's led you to those ideas? We'll just have 4 or 5 minutes to chat with the people around you. It's always sad interrupting these discussions. Yeah, there's discussion questions in the book, partly because I think often the more interesting stuff happens in the conversations than in the kind of content in a thing like this. Welcome to those who've just joined us as well. We've just been thinking about kind of the difference that Jesus' resurrection makes to the questions we have about life beyond death. But now what we're going to do is kind of zoom out from that a little bit and think about what the resurrection of Jesus tells us about life before death too. And it was one of the real joys of working on the book was that I got to sort of virtually interview a bunch of different friends with all sorts of different stories, but mostly people who'd come to believe in Jesus as adults. And basically I got to ask them about the difference that it made to them, the difference it made to their lives, the difference it made to how they saw themselves and the world. And that was really fascinating and helpful. And so we'll be drawing in a few of their, kind of what they said as we explore how the resurrection of Jesus speaks to two of the biggest questions that all of us, I think, have about our lives now. The first one is, am I loved as I really am? I came across the other day a quote from Sue Perkins off of the Bake Off from the olden days, who said, a lot of us, she basically said, we all say that what we most want is world peace, but actually I think what we really want is for there to be someone where we can be totally exposed before them and they look at us and they say, actually, you're all right. The creepy intimacy, she said, of being truly known. And I think this is one of the deepest questions for all of us. Can we be known as we really are and loved anyway? And if Jesus rose, then that answers that question, and it answers it beautifully. Because if Jesus rose from the dead, he proves two things. He proves that there really is a God, a personal God, and that God loves us enough to die for us. So Jesus during his life, he made many kind of crazy sounding claims. My favorite one is this moment where his friends say to him, look, Jesus, please, would you just show us the Father? Could you just give us one kind of glimpse of God himself? And Jesus says, don't you know me? Even when I've been with you for such a long time, anyone who's seen me has seen the Father. So he's saying, if you're looking at me, you're seeing God. If you want to know what God is like, just look at me, listen to me. And so we see in Jesus that there is a God and that he is personal, that he can become a human being because he's really a personal God who wants to relate to us. And not only do we see that, we then see that God choosing to die in agony on a cross. And one of my favorite things about the accounts of the resurrected Jesus is that when he's been resurrected with this glorious, kind of renewed, healed body, he still has the wounds from the crucifixion. He still has the wounds in his hands and his feet and his side. And he's constantly saying to people, look, it's really me. Look at the wounds. And I think that's so beautiful. Because that tells us that the cross is not a kind of interruption or a tragic accident. It's on purpose. And that speaks volumes. My friend Alison is a historian, and she grew up in an entirely kind of non-religious family, but she came to uni and essentially started investigating the evidence for the resurrection through a Christian friend talking to her about it. And she described the process as she was sort of wrestling with that in these terms. She said, the problem is, if the resurrection is true, then that drags everything else along with it. It would mean that there was a God. It would mean that the cross was necessary in order to forgive me. It would mean that, and this was a proposal which had never seemed very convincing to me before, I must not be a very good person, so that I was in need of forgiveness. And I love her honesty in that. I love that she said it was a problem for her. Because there's something very confronting about a risen Jesus with nail marks in his hands. Because the resurrection proves that his death wasn't an accident, it was intentional. Those wounds are there for a reason, and the reason is us. Jesus said that he died willingly out of love for us. He said it in lots of different ways, but famously he said that the Son of Man, which is a way of referring to himself, did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. In other words, every human being is like a captive in some way who needs to be freed, and Jesus, by his death, was paying the ransom that makes freedom possible. So what does he mean by that? In what sense are we captives? Well, Jesus explained that what he's talking about there is what the Bible refers to as sin, the way in which we do things wrong, we mess stuff up, we hurt other people, and we ignore God. And Jesus said that anyone who sins is a slave to sin. There's a sense in which we are kind of trapped by that wrongness in us and that wrongness that comes out of us. We're trapped in it. We're trapped in the kind of the guilt of it and the deadly consequences of that guilt. But he said that he died to set us free from that. And like Alison was saying in that quote, that is not very easy for us to sort of swallow. You know, I was thinking about this, and I never like being shown that I'm not as good a person as I thought I was, right? Even just if a friend, or let's be honest, mostly my wife, points out to me after some social interaction the way in which actually I might have upset somebody with what I just did or what I said. I don't know about you, but all of my instincts are to very quickly explain why I didn't do anything wrong, and if I did, I had a really good excuse for it, right? I think all of us on some level instinctively kind of think that we need, in order to be loved and accepted, we need to be good. We need to be good enough, at least. And so we're constantly making the case for our own defense. We spend our whole lives trying to convince ourselves and other people that we're actually not that bad, that we're really quite good people if you compare us to the average. You know, that we bottle up all the feelings and the thoughts that we'd be ashamed for anyone else to see. And and we're constantly, thinking about the ways other people have wronged us and trying not to think about the ways that we've wronged them. But the nail wounds in Jesus' hands undercut all of our efforts at self-justification, and they show us that we don't need them. They undercut those efforts. And Jesus tells us that our normal standards for what makes you a good person are way too low. Jesus says that what we were made for is to love God with all our heart and all our mind and all our soul and all our strength. Because God is the one who gave us everything we have, so it's right that we love him with everything that we have. And that we love our neighbors as ourselves. In other words, that we would love everybody around us just as much as we love ourselves, because every human being is as precious to God as we are. And those are huge callings. And I think most of us, when we hear that that is what Jesus teaches, our instinct is to say, well, obviously, yeah, it's nice to aspire to that, isn't it? But nobody's expecting us to do it, right? But Jesus doesn't just teach that. Jesus lives that. You read the Gospels, and you read about what Jesus was like, and it turns out that he actually did it. He was a real human being. And yet in his every interaction, he shows us what a truly good human being looks like. And when I stop comparing myself to the worst bits of the people around me and start comparing myself to the courage and compassion and generosity and justice of Jesus, I realize I have got a long way to go. But those nail wounds mean that Jesus sees all of that. He sees all of our failures, all of our selfishness, and he loves us anyway. He loves us so much that he willingly dies in agony to forgive us. We don't have to be good enough in any way to be loved and accepted. The wounds in Jesus' hands say that God knows you're a mess and he thinks you're worth dying for. Shirley became a Christian in her late 50s after several years of reading the Bible and discussing her questions with Christian friends. And I asked her what difference it makes to her to know that Jesus died for her. And she said this: "It's overwhelming, heartbreaking, and totally humbling. I no longer feel alone, and I know I'm loved. The change is palpable. I feel as though I'm becoming the me I should be." I love that. Being loved like this means that we don't need to hide and we don't need to pretend. Because we know that Jesus has taken onto himself all of our guilt, all of our failure, and dealt with it in his death. And now we are wrapped up in his goodness and his moral beauty. So we can come to God knowing that we're accepted and adopted like a loved kid in their own home, totally free, nothing to hide, nothing to prove. My friend Ellie expresses this really beautifully. She's starting out as a doctor and she discovered Jesus a few years ago. And she said this: "Before I became a Christian, I found my worth and meaning in things I had to work for and be better at. I had to continually strive to be enough. But when I trusted in Jesus, I knew my worth was found in him. I didn't have to be enough. He makes me perfect in God's eyes. It gives me so much peace to know that my identity is secure in him and I don't have to strive anymore." The resurrection tells us that there really is a God and that he loves us enough to die for us. That Jesus had to die for us, that that's how deeply we need forgiveness. But that he was glad to die for us because that's how deeply he loves us. So it's not just, as we saw at the start, that in some general sort of cosmic way, love will outlast death. It's that there is a real personal God who knows us as we are and loves us more than we could ever have dared imagine. And then our last question of the evening: does my life really matter? This is one of the things I find most precious about Jesus' resurrection. He makes sense of our instinct that life is meaningful, that surely it matters. And because of the resurrection, he fulfills our deep longing to have a lasting purpose. Let me read you a little thought experiment. Imagine you're working on something you care about deeply. You're writing it out on paper by hand. You're an author maybe, and this is the novel you've always dreamt of writing. But at the end of the day, a man comes in takes every sheet of paper you've been working on and throws them onto the fire. As you watch them smolder and shrivel up into ashes, he sends you home for the night, and you realize as you walk out of the room that you cannot even remember yourself what you've written. So you come back the next day and you do it again. You start from the start and you pour your heart and your soul into what you're doing. And at the end of the day, he comes in again, sends you home, and burns it all to ashes. There's nothing you can do to hang on, not even to the smallest scrap of memory. Imagine the frustration, the futility, the fury. You beg for more time. He says, okay, you can have a week. So you get up and you come in and you work and you work. You write and you write. By the end of the 7th day, you've written so much more than you had before, and it's stronger and deeper and more beautiful. You love what you've done. But then the man walks back in. He takes the piles and piles of work, and sheet by sheet, he burns it until it is all or nothing. It's exactly the same as everything you've never written. And as your head hits the pillow that night, you realize that the frustration is actually worse than before. More has been wasted. It was so good, it was so full of meaning, and now it's as much or nothing as everything that never was in the first place. It's just dust, as dead and silent as all the other dust. Now imagine that next morning, there's a surprise. The man greets you at the door and says he has an offer. You may have a lifetime to write. And then he will come and burn it all like always, and you will go home to forget and die. He stands there holding out the pen. What do? You know that the pain will be even greater. So much of yourself will have been poured into this work, so much beauty, so much worth, and yet it will still be ashes in the end. Like writing with a sparkler in the night, bright and brilliant, but nowhere to be seen. You reach out and you take the pen from his hand and you walk slow as a dirge to the desk and pull the first blank sheet in front of you. Because what choice do you have? The story might be beautiful while it lasts. You'll just have to try to forget how it ends. If death is the end, that's the story of our lives. Everything we've ever done, everything we are, will shrivel up into nothingness like paper on a fire. And you would think, wouldn't you, that if that was true, it would make everything feel pointless, meaningless, absurd. And I wrote that illustration and then I took it out of the book because various friends read the first draft of the book and gave me really helpful feedback, because I realized they felt like I was saying if they didn't believe in Jesus and they thought they were just going to die and that was it, I was telling them that their life was meaningless. But that's not my point. I'm saying two things. Firstly, I'm saying if atheism was true and death was the end, you would expect life to feel meaningless. But it doesn't a lot of the time. A lot of the time, we just know intuitively that stuff matters. We feel very deeply that our lives matter, our relationships matter, that what we do and how we treat people and the people we become, that matters. And my point is, I think that's true. That's because all of us, whether we realize it or not, were created by God. We are living in a universe saturated with meaning and significance. And it connects back to what we were saying earlier about justice. In the end, everyone will discover that what we have done with our lives matters. We are meaningful creations in a meaningful world. And that, I think, is a far better explanation for how life feels than the idea that we are just atoms bouncing around in an accidental universe that emerged from nowhere and is going nowhere. But second, I think for a lot of us, when we do kind of look death in the face and think about it, we do long for a sense that we have some kind of purpose that could outlast it. Some kind of purpose that won't be burnt to ashes one day. My mate Ethan told me once about the existential crisis he had in his kind of late teenage years when he realized that he was going to die and that surely nothing he would do in the rest of his life would endure forever. That however hard he tried, it would not be long before everything he did got forgotten or replaced or ruined. You know, the average grave gets visited apparently for 15 years. After 100, I'm pretty sure that no one will remember who you are. But the resurrection of Jesus offers us profound and permanent purpose. Paul, again, this witness to the resurrection, he writes this amazing chapter in the letter of 1 Corinthians about the resurrection and about the fact that Jesus rose bodily and literally from the dead, and how that is the beginning of a new creation. And his conclusion is this verse. He says, "Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain." He encourages believers in Jesus to look death square in the face and stand firm. He says we don't need to lose heart or give up. Jesus has gone through death. He's smashed through death and come out the other side, and now nothing we do with him and for him will ever be wasted. And to get our heads around what Paul means there, I find it really helpful to think about a metaphor he uses earlier in that same chapter. So when he's explaining how it could be that our resurrection bodies will be different, but still really us. You know, they'll be immortal and glorious and perfect, but they'll still be us. They'll still be our bodies. He compares it to the way a seed, when you bury it, then grows into a plant. And the plant is much greater and more glorious than the seed, but it really did come from that seed. And he says Jesus' resurrection body is like the first fruits of a whole new creation. He's the first seed to burst into glorious life, guaranteeing that one day the rest of the harvest will follow. So when Paul says your labor in the Lord, in Jesus, is not in vain, his point is this: death doesn't get to burn up the pages that we've written with our lives. Jesus' resurrection was the beginning of God's new world, and that world will last forever, and we get to participate in it right now. The things we do with Jesus and for Jesus are like seeds. All death can do is plant them. I imagine if you're all from Cambridge, you know the path through Jesus Green with the huge trees down either side of it. I discovered that they are London plane trees. And I love walking through that channel, because it makes you feel small in the best possible way. You know, in the summer when the sun shines through the canopy of leaves, it's just glorious. And I love imagining the day, you know, a century or so ago, when some ordinary gardener was working away somewhere with a trowel, planting those tiny seeds for the first time. You know, it wouldn't have looked like much. If you imagine somebody who didn't really know what a seed was, it would look like a totally crazy activity. There's these tiny little dead-looking spiky brown lumps, and you're burying it. It looks totally pointless. But I like to imagine that gardener straightening up gingerly and wiping the sweat off her forehead and saying, you know, one day, those things will be 100 feet tall, and they will take your breath away. And now they do. If we are following Jesus, then every moment when we show the kindness of God to somebody in need is a seed. Every minute of hard-fought faithfulness to God, every patient hour of caring for family or friends, every long year of holding on to hope in the fight with illness or anxiety or depression, none of it will be wasted. Jesus sees it, he values it, and he will bring something precious out of it, whether that's in us or in other people or perhaps in a way that we can't even imagine right now. When Jesus raises us from the dead into a healed world and wipes away every tear from our eyes, we will see what he has done with all the feeble, insignificant-looking seeds we've sown. And it'll take our breath away. So, We thought about those two questions in this part. Am I loved as I really am? Does my life really matter? Another chance for you to discuss with the people next to you what strikes you as the most important issue out of those two and why? And how do you feel about what Jesus' resurrection says about it? Again, 3 or 4 minutes, have a chat with the people around you. Great. Let me interrupt that again. Happily, this event is structured so that you have lots of space and time over cheese and wine at the end to keep chatting. Just before we go to a chance to think and chat about what questions this might all raise for you that you might want to ask, I just want to say a final word about the difference between if and as if. Because I think it's really popular at the minute, basically for people to say, yeah, I like the values, I like the principles in Christianity or in maybe religion more broadly or whatever it might be, but I'm not too bothered about whether or not it's actually true. You know, I think I should live my life as if God is real, or as if Christianity is true, or as if Jesus rose from the dead. Maybe Jordan Peterson is the most famous example of that, but it's I think really common now across the whole political spectrum. And indeed, the sort of many people who are not particularly political at all. And in that paradigm, the resurrection would be just kind of metaphor. It's a symbol of hope. It's, spring follows winter and life comes out of death. And Easter is actually a pagan festival and all of that kind of stuff. And so, that's a can of worms I didn't mean to open, but this sense of it's a symbol of hope in the face of darkness and so on. But the first witnesses who wrote the Bible did not think that they were writing a metaphor or a myth. You know, Paul, in that same chapter that we were just looking at, he says earlier on, if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless and so is your faith. More than that, we're then found to be false witnesses about God, for we testified about God that he raised Christ from the dead. In other words, he says this is either real or it is a pointless and immoral lie. The question is not whether these ideas I'm talking about sound nice to you. The question is, did this really happen? And of course, there is a world of difference between actually finding out if it happened and trying to live as if it happened. If the resurrection is just a symbol of hope, but it didn't really happen, then the hope it symbolizes is ultimately empty. You know, it will fail us when we need it most, when we come face to face with death or with injustice that we just cannot fix. Trying to live as if this is real won't help us. We need to know if it's true. Because if Jesus really rose, then we have real hope. Love really is stronger than death. Death really is not the end. There will be justice. There is a God who loves us and who wants to forgive us, and our lives can matter eternally. And so the question of whether or not this is really true is, I think, the most important question any of us can ever ask. And as I say, it's not what this event is about. So that's why we've got an event coming up in a few weeks' time, which you had a flyer on your chair for, with the KC Stephen Shaw talking about the evidence for the resurrection, assessing it from his kind of legal perspective. It's why the middle section of the book is a kind of cumulative, reasoned case for why we can actually believe that this is true, why, in fact, believing anything else takes a huge leap of blind faith. But I hope that tonight we've been able to see together that the answer to that question is the most important thing in any of our lives. It's the most important thing we could think about. So I'll give you another just couple of minutes with the people next to you, or if you prefer to inwardly process, to sit silently and think, what questions does all of this raise for you? And then Susanna will come back up and we'll have some time of Q&A.
We have an opportunity now to ask some questions to him. I I did just say, what limits do you want us to give to this question and answer sessions? We said we'll start with the book and what Mike said this evening. So yeah, we have some time now for questions. Hopefully you've had a chance to think about them. Emily will do the hardest part of running around this setup with a microphone. So if you do have a question, pop your hand in the air and Emily will come to you and then we'll go from there. Perhaps there was something in your conversations just now. Go for Alex.
Thank you. Thanks so much for your talk, Mike. I'm Alex. What I've been wondering is, I feel in our culture at the moment, there's a real attack on what truth might mean, an understanding of it as a vaguely Enlightenment concept that's more modern than we've beforehand appreciated. And I wonder how the truth claims of the resurrection in your head can help us respond to that, because I feel that I struggle and am bewildered in such conversations.
Oh, that's a very good question. Yeah, I hope that the question of the resurrection is quite a helpful way to kind of bring to the surface our feeling of how absurd it actually is to say that truth is a meaningless concept, or that it's sort of relative, dependent on culture, or any of the things that very intelligent people do say commonly. But if you kind of zoom it in from, talking about worldviews and God and stuff that it's easy to kind of feel like, well, maybe everyone's kind of right and everyone's kind of wrong. If you zoom it in on, like, who was Jesus and what happened that weekend? Did he die? Did he then actually walk out of the grave alive? It becomes very clear that you can't say that all religions are, basically saying the same thing and we just need to respect and, because actually all religions say very different things about that weekend. They're mutually incompatible things. Islam teaches that Jesus didn't really die. Obviously, all sorts of worldviews think that Jesus didn't really rise. And so it's kind of obvious that I hope that it sort of makes it obvious that there is only one thing can actually have happened there. Like, if we're saying that truth is relative, are we saying that it is both that Jesus walked out of the tomb and that he didn't walk out of the tomb? I've seen YouTube videos where people do this to Jordan Peterson. An atheist actually sits Jordan Peterson down and goes, if you had a video camera rolling on Easter morning pointing at the tomb, would you have seen Jesus? And it cuts through that sense of him kind of going, well, I live as if Jesus rose from the dead. I live as if God exists, and isn't that what faith means? This atheist guy just cuts right through it and says, well, no, the question is, did it happen? So hopefully, by kind of focusing, zooming in, there's something helpful about that, because we can feel at that point that we don't really know what we mean if we say that the truth about that question is relative, or that it's meaningless to ask what really happened. I wish that I had more profound things to say about that, but that's the only thing I can think of at the minute. It's a great question.
Do you have any more questions? Don't be shy. I also realised there's a whole group of people here. I should stand in a different place.
Great.
So I'm rather sympathetic to a lot of what you've said this evening, but I know people who aren't, and particularly about meaning in life, or is justice really a thing, or love and things like this. I think it's very difficult to live life as if you didn't really think and believe those things. Most people do, and if they don't, they don't last very long. But I've had friends say, well, wishing doesn't make it true. Wishing doesn't make it so. So how do you respond to people like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, just because, so essentially a lot of what I've been doing this evening is trying to kind of draw out the sense in which deep down we really want this to be true. And obviously a risk of that is that you can then ask yourself, well, is it just wish fulfillment? Are we just wishing that it's true and then convincing ourselves that it is because that would be nice? But the fun thing is that works both ways. Because I could also, perhaps in a different venue, have spent the evening explaining beautifully and floridly how terrible it would be if there was a God, and how terrible it would be to believe that God really was going to judge everyone who'd ever lived, and that we're actually accountable to him, and that we deeply need forgiveness. We needed someone to die in our place. It's incredibly challenging what Christianity teaches. And if Jesus rose from the dead, the logical demand of that on us is that we completely change our lives, that we turn away from living for ourselves and we live for him instead, and we trust him because he rightly has all authority over us. If he's the creator, he knows what we're made for, he has every right to tell us what to do. And so we very much can ask the same question of somebody who doesn't want to believe that Jesus rose from the dead, is, well, wishing that there wasn't a God and that Jesus hadn't risen from the dead doesn't make it so either. All of us are tempted to believe the thing that would be nice for us. All of us need to ask ourselves whether we actually have good reason for that. And then you're into wrestling with, is it true or not? I also think, though, there's something to be said for just because something is, a view of the world is bleak, doesn't make it more likely to be true. I think that there's something where it kind of feels like it's courageous and sort of rational and impressive to say, I think everything's meaningless and this is all just an accident and we've just emerged in a kind of totally random, meaningless process and nothing that we do will endure. It feels kind of brave to believe that. But just because something is bleak doesn't make it more likely to be true. If something is if consistently believing and living on the basis of something would make your life basically unlivable as a human being, or would bring a human society to its knees, that actually should be a little indicator that maybe that doesn't match up with what humans are, and what humans are really made for, or indeed not made for. So, yes, I think there's a challenge both ways, and I think it's good to challenge people to sort of ask, to actually investigate what reason there is to believe one or the other, rather than to just look at it and go, well, the people who believe in God, they're just believing whatever they want, but the people who don't believe in God, they're being the brave, courageous truth seekers. Are you actually seeking the truth? Because, if you do, you'll find that there's, like I was saying a minute ago, I think when you look at the evidence, it takes loads more blind faith to think that Jesus didn't rise from the dead than to think that he did. Thanks, Aaron.
Question at the back.
Hi, I'm Roger. It's one thing having that discussion when we learn from your book and from what we believe and what we about the resurrection, and the meeting in a few weeks' time will be very interesting. Again, that's one thing when you're talking to an atheist or to a non-believer. But then, what about all the other world religions? Are they all wrong? And obviously we believe they are, but they believe we're wrong. What's going on in the Middle East at the moment is sadly part of that, isn't it?
Well,
so how do we deal with all that?
I wouldn't want to tie that too closely. Certainly half of it. Anyway, but I hope it's not cheating to answer every question by saying, well, I think the resurrection is really helpful here, but I've been thinking about it a lot, and I do think it's really helpful. So this is one of the clearest ways in which Christianity is clearly a different kind of truth claim to basically everything else. So if it's a kind of tragedy of the history of talking about comparative religion that often people have basically taken their framework that they've got from Christianity, usually rejecting Christianity, but that's the framework they've got, and then they've just imposed it on other cultures and religions and gone, oh, right, this is a religion. This is like Christianity, but different. But actually, if you kind of look into Hinduism, it doesn't operate in anything like the way that we've been talking about tonight. There is no sense in which the system of belief or ethics or anything in Hinduism is dependent on a truth claim about something that happened in history. Like, no. It's stories that teach in a whole variety of ways, but nobody is like arguing over whether Krishna really did this or that or the other. And similarly, Buddhism, there's a guy who spoke here maybe once, maybe multiple times, called, what's his name? He used to be a Zen Buddhist monk. Ellis Potter. Thank you, Martin. Ellis Potter. And he used to be a Zen Buddhist monk, and he explains in one of his books that it's a saying amongst Zen Buddhists that if you see the Buddha, you should kill him, because the Buddha is not the point. It's not about what the Buddha did say or didn't say or achieved or didn't achieve. The teaching is the point. The way of life is the point. And can you imagine that in the New Testament? It's just a world away from the way Christianity thinks and speaks. The closest thing is maybe Islam. And I'm not an expert here, but there is such a huge gulf between the kind of sort of historical access that we have to Jesus and the resurrection and the kind of historical access that we have to the Prophet Muhammad or any of the early kind of history there. In some ways, when you kind of look into the history, the sorts of things that lazy atheist thinkers have accused Christianity of being, where it's kind of it's so far away from the original events that you have no idea. Presumably it was cooked up by communities to suit their needs hundreds of years later, and you can never get any access to what did or didn't happen at the time. That is completely wildly wrong about Christianity, and I talk about that in the book. But actually it's not a million miles away from a fair description of what happens if you try and get historically at the person of Muhammad and whether he ever did any miracles. And even if you take all of the story of Muhammad for granted, the key revelation, the thing that it all hangs on, is a private revelation in a cave that can't be tested, it can't be falsified, it's not a public event. Whereas Christianity, unlike everything else, is founded on the claim that a public life and death and resurrection happened. That multiple witnesses knew Jesus, heard what he taught, saw him die, and then saw him back from the dead. And so one of the things I say in the book, and that I think actually is really helpful in today's world, is that if you find yourself kind of baffled by all the different belief systems that there are and all the different philosophies and religions that you could subscribe to, a really good way to actually start is to say, well, if Jesus did rise from the dead, I know this one is true. If he didn't, I know it's not, and maybe I should start looking around at all the other options and trying to gauge things by myself. But Christianity stakes everything on the historical fact of Jesus' life and death and resurrection in a way that's completely unique. Thanks, great question.
Emily, we've got one at the front, but I'll let you do it.
Yes, one from Piyush, who I'm extremely grateful to, and I'm grateful that he's here because he wrote one of the 3 appendices in the back of the book, so you'll get to hear more of the wisdom of Piyush if you read the book. But for now, he will ask me a difficult question, no doubt.
There's more a comment. I couldn't get let the question about other religions
Oh, yeah,
pass
of
me
course.
by, of course. You know?
Why did I not just refer it to you? I've just wasted so much energy. That's what Pierce's appendix is on. So I'm very grateful that he contributed that to the book.
So again, just personal reflection, really. So having spoken to many people of different faiths, what I find the least helpful is to get tribal and say, well, this is right and this is wrong. You are correct and I am whatever. You know, so it's immensely unfruitful if you go there. So what a better way, I think, is to actually really, not to create a straw man or whatever, but to really say, absolutely, what does Hinduism really say in its very best form? What does Islam say in its very best form? And therefore, quote Hindu scholars and Muslim scholars, and then contrast it with Jesus Christ. And you find it's completely different. It's just a technique of how to talk to people of different religions. All the others are creeds that tell you what to do. The Bible is a biography introducing to a person and a relationship as such. I just finished with this one. Sorry, I'm going.
No, it's great.
I used to hate Christianity at one time because I thought it was so exclusive. I'm from a Hindu background. I was 28 when I became a Christian. I thought it was so exclusive, and I used to go to these groups, and I was so angry, dismissing me and all Hinduisms. But if you look at it properly, now I believe it's the most inclusive of all religions. All the others have assessments before you get in. In the Christian faith, whoever you are, whatever you've done, it's all done for you. Come in. So, yes, I think the truth claims, I'm not sure how helpful they are sometimes talking to the people. That's the only thing I want to say.
Yeah. Thank you, Pierce. That's really, really helpful.
Thank you.